First of all, thank you very much for your time because today is a holiday and it's raining heavily in the morning. So thank you very much to spend your time with us in this seminar. We have some people on the site, and I just heard we have 800 people in our online broadcast live stream. So we have a lot of people together with us for today. My name is Gladys Chong on behalf of the Fanji Foundation to welcome you, the speakers, and to also host the seminar for today. Today we are going to divide the seminar into two sections. First by Professor Huang, who is speaking in Chinese, followed by Mr. Hugh Moss, speaking in English. And we will have simultaneous interpretations online and also on-site for everyone for equal access. So please feel welcome to ask for my colleague at the back, on the side, wherever. And first of all, I would like to introduce why this topic, because it's quite interesting and open. This seminar is a series of talks related to the theme, the interplay of painting and writing. It is a topic developed over the past few years during the COVID years, when our team is trying to understand more why a painting works, how a painting develops, how a painter makes his or her images. So in the process of making an image, the knowledge, the will of the painters, not just these photos, but also the painting process, the painting materials, everything works their way into it. So everything counts to make an image meaningful to us. So this topic is about talking about how a painting develops, and from a way the writing habits, the concept actually affects how a painting is being made. From art history, not just the West and also the East, you find so many specific cases, practices, schools of movement, and even theories you can find talk about how painting once exercised influence on the development of paintings and vice versa. So there could be a different way, both way around. And here, by the terms writing, I don't mean just calligraphy. I think writing is a very broad term. It can mean a very wide range of creative practices, from inscription. So often you see inscription in the painting in part of a pictures, to scribbling. Scribbling could be a way to make an image, to the most sophisticated form, calligraphy. So everything might have their impact onto paintings. So here now, we have just say some few examples to elaborate a little bit the subject before we introduce the speaker. Here we have a painter from Ming Dynasty, 13th century China. He has been theorizing by using calligraphy approach to painting. So he say he will use the seal script to draw a trunk, to use the cursive script to draw a branch, and also the calligraphy style of Yan Zhenqing, the Tang Dynasty poets, and also calligrapher to do the lips. So you can see actually a painting looks very much like a calligraphy. And here we have another example. See if you have a closer look, all the stroke actually looks like calligraphy. And if we turn our eyes to 1950s, to the post-war abstraction, we have Zhao Pi here, and he has been also specifically talking about his painting is very much linked to oracle script. And then we go to the state, New York and San Francisco. We have Francis Kai and also Mark Kobe, two artists, very leading artists from the abstract expressionists. They have been using really heavily Eastern calligraphy to develop their image. So you see a lot of different patterns of lines. People often describe their painting as a calligraphy impulse. So we could have multiple possibilities to explain the interplay of painting and writing. And our speaker in the following session will introduce us to different patterns. And I think by asking this question, eventually we are asking another bigger question. What is the state, what is the condition of painting and its meaning to us in contemporary society? Because nowadays, I think we are facing different medium. We have computer painting to an image. So what is the point? How do we approach? How do we understand a painting? And after introducing this topic, I would like to introduce briefly our speakers. Because why I'm taking this question, I often talk to our painters because they are really the ones spending every day doing this practice, thinking this issue in depth. So I got a lot of insights from that. A painter can really tell you how they develop a painting, all the process, all the whimsical uncertainty. And here we have Mr. Hugh Moss, my dearest friend, my dearest mentor. We have been talking a lot about arts. He is a theorist, writer, collector, and very importantly, he is a painter. His work is really demonstrate how painting, how writing could be as a concept, as a pictorial form, integrate into his painting. And he is also going to analyze a lot of friends from his circle, all very important modern Chinese artists. They use different ways to show, to demonstrate how writing and painting can be merged in different ways. And then other than talking then to artists, I also talk to a lot to art historians, especially those whose expertise is in Chinese classical paintings. Because I think Chinese art, there's a very close relationship between painting and writing, and they put it into much more specific way, painting and calligraphy. These two items are very much closely linked in theories and also in practice for nearly 2,000 years. Many painters themselves are already practitioners of calligraphy. They are poets. Painting, calligraphy, they utilize the same material, the same brush, the same paper, the same ink. They even in theory, they use the same criteria to judge whether a painting or a piece of calligraphy is good or not. So I think initially there's a very intimate correlation between these two forms. So here today I bring experts from these two perspectives to the audience. So let's get some insight from them. And please welcome to the stage with me, Professor Huang.
Thank you. Good afternoon. 1,000 years ago, the creative and influential minority in China decided that a combination of painting, poetry, and calligraphy would be ideal for the literati in painting tradition. It was known as the Three Perfections, and it's been the bedrock of the Chinese literati tradition ever since. My father was one of the leading art dealers, Chinese art dealers in London, back in the second half of the 20th century. And I was brought up surrounded by Chinese art and culture. As soon as I took a serious interest in it as a teenager, beginning to collect and study, I found I was drawn more to Chinese art than to Western art. And as I got more deeply involved over the years, particularly once I encountered the ink painting tradition, I began to hit paradox. Now, paradox is a very good sign that you're bumping into the limitations of your current way of understanding. And I felt that once I was involved with ink painting, the conventional Western methods of understanding art, the art theory, didn't seem to make much sense when it was applied to ancient Chinese painting and the Chinese ink painting tradition. So I started to rethink the theory. First, by making it a transcultural theory, rather than just expecting any Western ideas to be equally pertinent to China. Something that would allow me to approach the art of any culture from any point in time. Then I began to realize that art wasn't something separate from life. And I learned that back in the Zhou dynasty in China, art was already considered to be a means of self-realization for the influential minority. And self-realization is basically the building block of civilization. So that shifted my thinking completely. Finally, because I was now involved in creating a theory of art and consciousness, I had to learn about consciousness. So that's when a whole new series of ideas was introduced based on the Chinese concept of the Tao, basically, or Buddha nature, but also in the Hindu concept of Brahman, which is that there are two ways of knowing, not just the one. We in the West have been focusing so much on the intellectual way of knowing that we've almost marginalized a trans-intellectual way of knowing, which was vitally important if you want to understand Chinese art. I published this theory over the years in various snippets, but finally in a book in 2015 called The Art of Understanding Art. And that sold out, and rather than reprint, I decided to rewrite it, which resulted in another book last year called The Art Reboot. I rewrote it not because the theory had changed, but because my ability to express it had improved a bit. So everything I say today is based upon that new theoretical approach for Lee. Of the three, painting is obviously the easiest to appreciate. It's right there on the surface. But in Chinese aesthetics, over 1,000 years or more, the surface, the art object, the immediate meaning is not what art has been all about. In a mature aesthetic culture, you shift to the entire process. And the process is what the art's all about. And that includes the creative input of the audience going forward, indefinitely into the future. It's a simple but essential shift in understanding. But it makes a major difference. Now, the original text, the original text can be whatever the artist chooses to write. But because you've got those three elements of painting, poetry, calligraphy, it allows you certain formal additions to just having a painting. So this is both for sure. And here's balanced the obvious image of the two doves and the text, but they split the text into two. One with the seal script characters for the title and the other for the commentary. And he's then added the two signals, an extension of the textual additions. Now, the balance is exquisite, and if you doubt that, just mentally remove this seal, and it makes an enormous difference. But it also makes another difference for one of the inner languages of Chinese painting. The artist has used cinnabar just for the claws and beaks and the birds, connecting a sort of diagonal line as an extra language. So by combining the three perfections, the artist has a much, much larger array of things to play with formally. In this painting by Wimbledon, it's the same idea, but in this case a much simpler version where he's just split painting in two with the image at the bottom and the text at the top. And if I might be allowed a little personal aside here, there is another literati association involved here, which is not obvious. And it is that Wimbledon came to stay with us in Sussex at my studio in 1991. And he was painting a large, enormous landscape on my studio wall. And I had bought a very large scholar's stone in Taiwan several months earlier and had it shipped to Sussex. And I hadn't unpacked it. It was still in its crate, sitting in front of the fireplace in the studio. it stayed there, and we used it for sitting around drinking wine at night and stuff like that. And the day before he was to leave, Dan said, "What's in the crate?" I saw it's a rock I bought in Taiwan. And he said, "Oh, I love rocks. Can I have a look?" So we unpacked it, put it on the painting table, and Dan got quite emotional. "Oh, it's the rock of my dreams. It's blah, blah, blah." So obviously he was absolutely positive about it. So without thinking, I gave it to him. I sent the phone. "It's all yours. Take it." I cut my love for it, as he later explained the Chinese expression was. And we put it back in the crate the next morning, and I shipped it to his studio in Hawaii. And it demonstrates the part of the literati aesthetic that embodies the three perfections. It demonstrates that association of like minds, which is so important in any sophisticated culture. But not only that, with paintings, that is off the stage of time. Dan and I were right there in face-to-face, but it would also work when we were looking at old paintings from the collection. We're communicating with ancient masters. And when we painted something, which we did, we painted a joint work the whole time he was there. We were working on a hand scroll together. He was teaching me how to do it. We would do a bit, and he showed me, and I'd be given the brush, and I'd carry on. He said, "No, not like that. Take the brush back and carry on." This went on for 3 weeks. And it's a painting I treasure, but that will communicate into the future. So it's beyond the state of time, which is an exciting added dimension. This is much for us a matter of the surface subject matter. It's an entertaining painting by Mai Junyao, satirizing the meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev in 1989, when they met on a boat off the coast of Malta to discuss global issues. So he got the two monkeys playing with boats in the water. Intriguingly, it was a very obvious reference to the wave of Hokusai in the series of paintings of Mount Fuji. It suggests that these two guys are playing with global issues. It's not just America and Russia. In this case, Wang Jun has painted a picture which, without the inscription, would work perfectly well. The balance is delightful. The one finger looking down at the bird, the other finger looking up at the flying bat. But because Wang Jun is part of the tradition, he felt inclined to put on an inscription. And it's balanced nicely. The expressiveness of the inscription matches the expressiveness of the roads. Again, integrating the two in a way which is not possible if you don't have all three to play with. This is a painting by Feng Shaolin, and takes that integration of the brushwork of the inscription and the brushwork of the depiction a stage further. Feng Shaolin's expressive brushwork is always a part of her landscapes. In her mature paintings, of all of her brushwork from there to the 90s, she uses this. Now, once you've got past the fact that that is a picture of a series of terraced fields, it's become very abstract. And again, she balanced the expressiveness and the calligraphy with the expressiveness of the landscape strokes. Lo Xiaohuang, in this painting, has used the text to lead in the poetry didactically. He was a teacher, and this is aimed at his students. And basically what he's saying in the additional inscription is that Chinese landscape can be made after just some lines and dots, which he does. And again, he split the title in the ones in the script from the rest of the text to mean that extra formal element. And then the last two lines of the text come down into the painting to integrate the text more noticeably with the painting. Mrs. Fagg again takes it one stage further here, where her expressive brushwork is balanced by the inscription. In this case, the inscription is also acting as part of the image because she's used it as the distant mountain peaks. I began to paint seriously in the late 1970s. And by the time I picked up the brush, I'd already begun to collecting paintings. And I'd also spent a decade as an agent for many of the expatriate artists in the diaspora. So I was beginning to get more involved. And I became very friendly with Fo Chao-lin. She had a studio in London where I was living. And when I moved to Hong Kong in 1975, I would visit her at her studio there. I watched her paint frequently, and again, often doing joint works with her and just fooling around and learning, all the time learning. I was strongly influenced by her art, but I was also influenced by her approach to art. She spent a lifetime studying various modes of calligraphy since she was a child. I realized that I needed to get involved as an artist with these three perfections. But I also realized it would take a lifetime to learn Chinese to a sufficient level to even begin to be a calligrapher in Chinese. And then another lifetime to even aspire to mastery of calligraphy. So I decided to write it in my own language, and which actually turned out to be quite interesting because I watched Tongyang's from childhood, all of his artist friends. I got the hang of what Chinese calligraphy was all about. And it suddenly occurred to me that there's no reason why you can't do that in the other language and just apply all of the same rules, all of the same materials, the same brushes, the same inks, and the same features. So I did it. Now, in this case, I also obviously got this from Mrs. Farrell, probably not consciously at the time. But when I added the inscription, it suddenly occurred to me to put to split it into two, so that there is a line of white running through it, which continues the more obvious waterfall in the background. Again, that gives you that extra possibility for integrating the three perfections. A similar thing happened here. This was inspired by Chen Shiquan, another of our artist friends at Baton, where the inscription was written as the threads of a blind, one of the blinds, and as texture on the table. Now, Chen Shiquan never actually used text that way because he didn't write a lot in his papers, just signature and a title was in a blue ribbon. But I did get from him the method of painting, which is to use alum resist, which you splash, in this case, splashed on. But in his case, he also often, that first alum layer mixed with water, would be very calligraphic. He will be doing calligraphic lines, which would then fade. You wouldn't even see them on the paper until you put the colour on. Then the colour goes on from both sides, and you interpret. In this case, I used this is one of a series of 7 imaginary walking staves. So I used the calligraphy as halos around the staff tops. Now, I've been very interested in walking staves as a collector since I was a teenager almost. They're ubiquitous in Chinese paintings. You can't look at an ancient Chinese painting without fumbling into a skull holding a walking staff underneath an enormous mountain. But then they're really rare in real life as art. Clearly, most of the ones you see at pictures were just functional. But the few, I've collected them, so I'm still collecting them. I've got about 4 I'd be willing to admit to. They're very rare things in fine quality art. But they're also, intriguingly, the only aspect of the literati culture where there's no connoisseurship. Every other thing that they're involved in, there's endless connoisseurship, and it's very complicated. It is ivory tower stuff, so they create this connoisseurship so that only they understand it, basically. And that exists for woods, for soapstones, for seals, for everything. Not for what walking staves. So I set about inventing it. I started creating the literature, creating a taxonomy of types and so forth, and spent years painting imaginary walking staffs to illustrate all of this, which was a part of my own creative journey into the mystical aspects of literati culture. this Tom Cowley again, this is their hometown on the Grand Canal. Had we not seen the earlier painting, we might assume that what she was doing here was just adding the calligraphies in blank space above, but clearly this now represents hills in surrounding Montchid. But it does illustrate one more thing, her naive-looking figures are quite different from how we might at first take them. And again, an indication of the inadequacy of taking terms from the West and trying to apply them to paintings from the East. She'd often been called the Grandma Moses of Chinese painting, but Grandma Moses painted the way she did because she couldn't paint any other way. She had the perception of a child, no training, so she just painted like a child. If you look at Mrs. Fang's painted earlier paintings, particularly under Zhao Shuang at the Yingnan school when he was her teacher, she has extraordinary technical drawing skills. She can paint anything she wants. What this is a much more sophisticated essentialization. The calligrapher, of which she was a notable calligrapher on her day, first of all, to learn all the skills, all the surface skills in calligraphy and expression, and then gradually headers away the surface skills to get down to the essentials, the bones of calligraphy. And that's what she does with her figures. This is not naivety, it's very sophisticated, reacquired naivety, which pretty much sums up the literati tradition of painting. Well, never mind. Mrs. out a hand scroll. There was a hand scroll there, but I'm not sure how to go backwards on this thing. I'll just a minute. Oh, there's. I see. Okay. Right. So again, combining the two, I painted an enormous painting of imaginary rock. I've an obsession with rocks. Soon came out in the paintings, and I added an incense burner. And I paint incense burners quite a bit because they're part of the literary tradition, very much so. They're important in amongst the aesthetic. And also because it's so much fun painting the smoke. Basically, with Chinese calligraphy materials, if you take a brush and you dip it in water, just add a little bit of greater ones on it, the rest of a little darker, kind of the other, maybe a tin of black or something. And then just from the top of the incense burner, and just let it rip, you normally get some pretty impressive smoke. So in this case, what I did was to continue the slide round and then have it delve into the inscription. Little things like that. When you're painting, or when I'm painting, I find it's an adventure. You're not quite sure what you're going to do until you do it, basically. And I think most literati paintings probably like that. That you are, since you're involved in self-realization, to start with a fixed idea and try and visualize it rather contradicts that approach. Right, now we get to the hand scroll. I've always been keen on hand scrolls for various reasons. One is, I think it's the most sophisticated format in visual art worldwide. One of the reasons for that is because it breaks down the distinction between artist and audience. You become part of the process by changing the composition as you go through it. You're in charge of the temporal aspect of it. You take your own time through it. It's an adventure journey, and you're in charge. So it's an incredibly sophisticated aspect of the art. This particular one is also a reflection of another literati ideal, and that's the friendship between the literati and the poems of melancholy farewell. So here there's a guy at that end in the darkness playing the guqin, a little dude leading here, looking back over his shoulder as he departs. There's 100 poems on this theme in Chinese art. And the last couple of lines of the poem read, "I choose a cheerful song to send you on your way, but what I hear is melancholy. A single cloud can break a man's heart." again, in the 60s, he began to explore more fully the possibilities of calligraphic landscape drawings as an integration into the landscape. Now, this you might almost think is a character, a readable character. But this is how he morphed into his classical paintings of the late period with the Zen paintings, or Chan paintings, actually, of which this is one of his masterpieces from that period. Now, there's very little text here. It's nicely placed, and that's fine, but what it does do is it leads us to another little thought about the difference in tolerance between East and West. And this is the term abstract. It's a weasel word if you shift it from one culture to another, because abstract in the West means it's either figurative or it's not. It's a binary issue. It's either one thing or the other, and we both know what that means. But in Chinese art, it just doesn't work that way, because centuries ago, the Chinese shifted in the literary art tradition to painting subject matter and putting the abstraction, developing the abstraction within the inner languages of line, form, colour, and texture. To have done otherwise would have been as foolish to them as deciding which lake to walk on. So they developed abstraction as an inner thing. And to take that weasel word, there are others, modern and traditional, other words that are weasel words. They don't work. They don't mean the same thing on either side. This is Song Jiaoling again, and a rather intriguing and unusual use of the text. In this case, the text is in the seals, which are just an extension of the poetry of the text. Seals can be either names, obviously, or poetic sentiments, or anything or pictorial, as one of these is. But what she's done here in this weird way of stamping her seals all over the clothing, she's not only incorporated the text to some extent, but she's also added texturing and patterning to the rose, which is clever. This is Tong Yang's the photographer from Taiwan, and it's not obviously a three perfections issue. There's a word that is missing, but calligraphers often do it this way: that the main say, which is a very well known aphorism about longevity of the mystic realm in the good. If you imagine that she's treating that as the pictorial image, and then adding this text at the top, is very similar to the dam painting we looked at back at the beginning with the rock. And Horshaw does the same thing here, where the seal script is backed by a very abstract patterning of ink markings. This is by Fan Zhong, painted sometime prior to 1979. It seems to have very little original in the back of the three perfections, because the only one of the third perfection is his seal, which is fairly prosaic, because all it does is identify him. But when it was used as a first-day cover for a stamp celebrating Shibaisha in China, we can see that the response to it by the audience in adding the text about Shibaisha is treated as if he'd added it to the painting. Again, the title in one script, the rest in printing Kaishu. Herb Harshaw acquired a piece of poetry written on his own books, the top piece, written by Shubei Hong, and it was inspired by the photo exhibition to paint an illustration for it, and then mount the two together. Now, it's another example of the audience participation, but in this case, both of them were artists, and so Porsches responding to as audience to an earlier artist. But to some extent, in a tradition as sophisticated as the literati tradition, Aren't we all artists? Creativity is the fundamental force in the universe, and we reflect this at some level. Without approaching life creatively, we would not have evolved at all, let alone to the vast benefits of intellect. At the level where our creativity is meaningful to others, in effect, we become artists. At the level where it expresses timeless meaning, we impact upon civilization far into the future. Another aspect of the poetry doesn't doubt the text at all. This is a small painting by Hugh Moss, tiny in fact, but anyone who's ever stood in front of Van Gogh's Starry Night knows that size doesn't have anything to do with it. What he does, he mastered this technique. He didn't necessarily invent it, so he came from three artists at the same time, of taking a pan of water or a flat surface of water, dribbling in or colored onto the surface, and then swirling it around a bit to get random patronized. Then when you drop the paper onto it, it picks up instantly exactly what's on the surface of the water. You then very carefully lift the paper out and let it dry. Then you turn it over and look at it, work from your 8 possibilities, 2 sides, 4 virtues. So you were sort of taken them out and looked at them until you found them something that said, oh, I know what that's going to be, and then started developing. And he might not even continue with that. He might, but halfway through, slip it over and try the other side. With my own paintings, I very rarely know what I'm doing or where it's coming from until 10 layers in or several layers in, because I'm always up to switching it to see what's happening on the other side or changing the furniture. This is the second, much larger version of the same technique. The distant view of Wimbledon River. But what we're looking at here with poetry is the poetic approach to the painting, to the way you make the picture. Now, it has been said that Wimbledon doesn't have any brushwork, which is, again, it's too much of a surface definition. It's too binary. Is there brushwork or isn't there based upon calligraphy? He doesn't use calligraphy much other than for signature and dates and titles sometimes. But a lot of his major paintings start out with very calligraphy, strong black color with a big brush. Again, often completely white, as Professor Ford was discussing. And then it builds up. That's all the brushwork. You don't have to be writing a poem. The last painting we're going to look at is this one, Whistle by Chopin, where he has inscribed his poetic thoughts on an uplift at the top. Now, in my view, I'm not sure it's a code to everybody actually, but it's something to everyone I was writing this, that the 3 perfections goes back far earlier than the literati tradition of 1,000 years ago. From the end of the Han Dynasty at the latest, it was involved in the actual landscape. If you look around China on the cliffs and escarpments and boulders, there are endless inscriptions which were brushed on by someone good as good for it, and then carved into the landscape. So they were actually taking the real landscape and making that into the 3 perfections without painting it. I'm sure that must have influenced the 3 perfections in the way it developed when they started painting landscape. And whether or not I was reflecting this when you decided to write on the cliff doesn't matter. As part of the audience participation, our creativity in responding to it, in interpreting it, in thinking up something the artist might not have had in mind, is every bit as valid as what the artist did have in mind. That's the whole point of shifting part of the point of shifting to process-based aesthetics rather than product-based aesthetics. Now, in conclusion, as valid and immensely valuable as the explicable fragments of the literati aesthetic may be, They're incidental and inherently limited, while the whole purpose of art, efficiently recognized within the Chinese aesthetic since the time of Confucius, is to transcend the fragments in order to grasp meaning as an undifferentiated whole, thus providing infinite perspective to finite intelligence. The implication is that while rules arise out of art, there are no rules that govern it. The street perfections are a path, not a destination, and on that path, artists and audience alike are adventure tourists involved in a search for wonder. So, let me thank you for joining me in the search and for your attention. Thank you.